In 1938, as the wheels of the German war machine begin to turn, Austria is taken under German control. 13-year-old George Leitmann and three generations of family live in Vienna, Austria. It is a time where nobody is safe, especially Jewish families like the Leitmanns, who live under constant scrutiny, with the threat of imprisonment and death looming ever larger as time wears on. By 1940, it is clear that the dangers of staying at home in Vienna far outweigh the benefits. The Leitmanns board an Italian ocean liner bound for New York and successfully escaped the grasp of the Germans. In New York, George successfully completed high school and immediately applied to an accelerated science branch of the Army. However, they needed soldiers, not scientists. George was assigned to the 286th Combat Engineer Battalion instead and fought across Europe to liberate the Jews from Nazi concentration camps. He took part in the liberation of the Landsberg concentration camp, an offshoot of the infamous Dachau. George describes the self-protecting denial of the townspeople at Landsberg as they walked through the camp.
So we marched them all, man, woman, and child, through the camp. And since I spoke the language, I could understand what they were saying to each other. They thought it was an outrage. These Americans are barbarians to make us look at this. That's what they said. So, it's it's human nature to try to find excuses for practical reasons, perhaps, and to try to convince yourself that you weren't guilty.
Right. Following the defeat of the Germans, Mr. Leitmann was transferred to the Army Intelligence Corps. There he spent several months working as a special agent, gathering intelligence in Europe regarding the atrocities of the war. He was later transferred to Nuremberg, where the Nazi war crime trials were taking place. His linguistic skills and background made him an ideal interrogator. He interviewed many German officials and found many of them guilty of the atrocities they had been tried for. He also found that, similar to the people of Landsberg, many people refused to be accountable for the atrocities that they had not directly committed. Although a regular citizen could understandably be excused from war-related crimes, it seemed ridiculous to George that German military officials could possibly take this defense.
I have a very strongly held philosophy of the separation of guilt and responsibility. And I always use slavery for myself to explain this to people who don't understand what I'm talking about. It's obvious that going back in American history, obviously for reasons of not having been an American, and number two, being too young. I had nothing to do with slavery in terms of actually holding slaves or my family holdings or anything like that. But I still feel that as an American, as a U.S. citizen, I'm responsible, particularly for the aftermath. It's very important to keep these two things in perspective. You can't accuse people who weren't there of being guilty, but you can't excuse them from saying, well, I got nothing to do.
At the end of our conversation, Mr. Leitmann left me with an anecdote that encapsulates the impact of the inhumanities of war.
I'll give you one more instance of the inhumanity of both people and wars. So we were driving along this whole convoy of my unit, maybe 30, 40 trucks, maybe more, 600 plus people. And there were a lot of German dead lying in the fields. This is within days of the combat. And it was warm already. I think it must have been maybe late March, early April. And the GIs would take pot shots at the bodies and hear the gas escape because they were all bloated up. This kind of, which is not killing people, but it's an inhuman thing to do. And that's what war does to people. Yeah. It sort of dehumanizes you.
Through this experience with Mr. Leitmann, I have learned that while the decision to enter into a war may be forthright and simple, the act of war itself is atrocious and complex. It is easy to justify the idea of war, but it is impossible to carry out a war without coming in direct conflict with the very humanity that drove us to do it in the first place. As humans, we cannot ignore attacks on humanity, such as the Holocaust, and we use the idea of humanity to justify many of our military actions. We are all responsible for the well-being of humanity, and we must protect it. The only way that we, as a society, can achieve peace is to take responsibility for the well-being of humanity and make an effort to support peaceful relationships on every level. In passing his stories and experiences on to me, Mr. Leitmann has also passed on immense and profound insight on the subject of war. I feel that I am now more equipped to deal with the world and its problems because of this experience.